Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Burt.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be taking you to Sidmouth in Devon to go behind the scenes into a day in the life of the senior statistician at the Donkey Sanctuary.
But first, we're joined by our senior news reporter Emily Harle, who has been out and about meeting Dan Corry, the outgoing chief executive of New Philanthropy Capital. Emily, how's Dan doing?
Hi, and thank you for having me. Yes, Dan's doing great. He is preparing to step down at the end of October after 13 years as the chief executive of MPC. In that time, he's definitely not shied away from speaking out on policy matters that MPC feels are important to the sector. When Dan Corry joined the think tank, he told Third Sector in an interview that he was really keen for MPC to be edgy and speak out on issues that can be somewhat controversial to people in the sector. And when I spoke with him the other week, he spoke with me about the sort of delicate balancing act of maintaining MPC's edge, but also keeping the sector on side.
We think hard about our comms. Not only, what are we going to put on social media or reports, but what's our tone? And I've certainly felt that the tone that was right for MPC was to be provocative. Every couple of years, we do a stakeholder sort of survey. In the intervening years, we do some qual interviews to find out how people think we're doing. And we almost always get some people saying, bloody MPC, can you shut up? All I need is a bit of help with my fundraising or something. And then another set of people say, what happened to MPC? It used to be aggressive and sort of, having a go, and you've gone soft. And my sort of view is if we're getting a bit of both of those, we're probably hitting it right.
Interesting observation. And did he tell you about any of the more provocative stances that NPC has taken?
Yeah, so we had quite a lengthy conversation about that, actually. One of the ones that he mentioned is NPC's stance that government funding should prioritise more deprived areas. At first glance, seems rather uncontroversial, but actually he told me that this didn't sit well with some organisations in the sector. Specifically, NPC's stance looks at differentiating gift aid by area. And he told me that particularly membership bodies working in more affluent areas or certain subject matters, these organisations didn't take too well to that because obviously it doesn't necessarily benefit them in their work. And also some other people have come out and said, actually, giving the government this ability to prioritise funding, sort of means test it based on area, means that funding for the sector could become a bit of a slippery slope.
And of course, famously, Dan Corry came into the voluntary and not-for-profit sector from an economics and a policy background, having been not only an advisor to the former PM Gordon Brown, but also the head of a number 10 policy unit and a special advisor in a number of government departments. So he was very much in that sort of policy space before he moved into the voluntary sector. What did he say about that transition?
Yeah, so it seems like his time as an advisor to the PM and all of the rest of it has definitely shaped his views on how the charity sector should engage with policymakers and also how it operates more generally. And one of the things he talked about was the importance of including both data and emotional stories while speaking with ministers in order to get the most sort of bang for your buck out of that meeting.
At times, I must admit, I've got slightly frustrated by the charity sector's, the way it goes about trying to campaign. There's a sort of thing which I totally understand that, what we do in the charity sector is incredibly valuable and we know it and everybody else should understand it and therefore support us more, give us more money, make contracts easier, have us at every round table and all the rest of it. But those arguments won't really work in the end. You have to prove your value in different ways. You have to come together. And so on. You need to have good data, rigorous data, but you do also need to tell the stories. And we always say at MPC, yes, you should have no stories without numbers, but you should also never have numbers without stories. So if you've got the data and you can show that you work, and then you can also have some case studies, ideally when you get your meeting with the minister, turn up with some people with lived experience who can tell you what it was like. And that's how you get to move policy on. Ministers in particular, probably officials less, but ministers are very moved by real experiences.
And so Dan has quite a strong government background. And given his experience in that, What was his view on how the new Labour government is getting on?
Yeah, so it's early days, but it seemed mostly positive from his perspective. He thinks the government is more open to conversations with the sector now compared to the previous government we had. And he made a really interesting comparison to his days working as an advisor in government after Labour's win in 1997 as well.
I think I remember in 97, so I was working at the Department of Trade and Industry. And what happened then, I think, is happening now, which is the doors are open again to the charity sector. The charities are back in the conversation and are not seen as sort of evil. There's a bit more respect as well that, you know, of course the charity is going to campaign and that's what it does. And that doesn't mean they're horrible people. I mean, you get an example very early on. Of course, Age UK is sort of going into battle with the government on the winter fuel payment. And I'm sure the government, you know, probably privately in some meeting somewhere saying, oh, bloody Age UK. But they're not spinning. They're not trying to get front page exposés of Age UK in the way that was sort of happening. I never quite knew why they had to go at National Trust so much.
So Dan is obviously going to be stepping down from MPC. At the moment, we don't think he has a clear charity role lined up to go on into next. So as he prepares then to step away from the voluntary sector, did Dan have any final reflections, Emily, on the state of the charity world in this present moment?
So we did have quite a lengthy talk about engaging with policymakers and all of that kind of thing, but also he had some really interesting things to say about whether the charity model itself, as it is the best way to help communities. And he spoke about how social enterprises are now seen by some people as a better alternative.
There's a question about whether the charity model is sort of dying. You know, some example I kind of give is if you cared about mental health in your town 30 years ago, you'd set up a charity, have a jumble sale, do a sponsored run, apply to grant makers to try and have a charity that could help them. Now, might you be more likely to set up a social enterprise, mending bikes, and you made sure that half of your staff were people who had mental health issues? Because it was less sort of patronising, it was less sort of top-down, it meant you didn't spend your entire life fundraising, and that therefore would the social enterprise model be more tempting for people, younger people. Similar, you know, with profits for purpose, I can be sceptical about them, I am. But nevertheless, is that a better way? And my view is, I've always thought that's going to happen, and some people have talked about that happening. But actually, this charity model is still, despite all its problems and its very weird governance that you have to have in a charity, like you don't have the CEO on the board, bizarre. But it's actually survives, and it's still sort of thriving, and I think there's room for everyone.
Final thoughts from Dan Corry there. The charity model itself is dying. Maybe he is kind of a rat leaving a sinking ship, as it were. I don't know. Nice to see him maintaining that NPC edginess right to the end. Emily, it sounds like this is going to be a really interesting piece when it comes. Moving on to our main feature. Today we are taking you to beautiful Devon. Lucinda, tell us about your recent trip. What were you doing down there?
I went to the donkey sanctuary just outside Sidmouth in Devon. It was in the middle of the summer holidays, mid-August. But yeah, weather was not really on my side on this particular occasion, but it was still a really wonderful visit. If anyone hasn't been to the donkey sanctuary in Devon, the site is right up on the top of a very steep hill. And it was amazingly misty, but very, very peaceful and atmospheric, in spite of the fact that it was the middle of the school holidays and there were a lot of visitors there that day. They recorded 400,000 visitors to that main site in Devon last year. One thing that I found interesting visiting the charity was the strength of their branding. It really was excellent. I was very aware of why I was there, who their beneficiary service users are. It is the donkeys. On that particular site, they've got 595 donkeys, although, as we'll hear in our interview, they care for thousands of donkeys all around the world. But yes, in terms of the branding, there were donkey ears on the cappuccino, dusted over in chocolate in their cafe.
Not actual ones, yeah, I was going to...
Chocolate donkey ears. And the menus were on beautiful wooden boards with donkey ears. And yeah, it really gave me a good appreciation of how beautiful donkey ears actually are. However, to cut to the real chase of why I am talking about donkeys now, I was there at the donkey sanctuary to meet Dr. Stuart Norris, who is the senior statistician. And we're going to start our tour with Stuart First of all, in a fully furnished writing hut, which used to belong to Dr. Elizabeth Svensson, who's an important figure in the history of the Donkey Sanctuary.
Dr. Svensson is the founder of the Donkey Sanctuary, so it was founded back in the 1960s. She was an absolutely incredible woman, and she started off just by rescuing a few donkeys from a market, and now we have nearly 6,000 within our ownership across the UK, Ireland and Europe. So
Beautiful. I wouldn't mind sitting and writing in here.
oh yes, my daughter loves coming and playing in here, and sort of on the phone you can hear her voice, which is really nice, and my daughter loves that, and it tells a story about the Donkey Sanctuary and sort of how it's come from a very small organisation to an international donkey welfare charity.
Something that always surprises me about the Donkey Sanctuary is actually the sheer size of it as a charity. It is one of the biggest and most popular charities in the UK. Its last recorded income was in the region of £57 million. So it's a really, really big organisation, and not one actually that I have spent that much time with in my time at Third Sector. But why was it that you wanted to meet Stuart and do this feature in particular?
Well, this is part of a somewhat long-running series over the past 18 months, looking into a day in the life of various roles in the charity sector. So you might recall, if you've been listening to this for a while, we did a day in the life of a policy advisor at Barnardo's. Before that, I spoke to a procurement expert at London Zoo to find out what a day in her life looked like. And we started this off by looking at a day in the life of a grant maker at Comic Relief. So I've really enjoyed doing these features, lifting the lid on interesting roles that might not usually get the same level of media exposure as, for example, a chief executive might. It's an opportunity to understand what the role involves and also hopefully give some sneaky insider tips from people working in those roles for the benefit of anybody who feels that they might like to take a stab at it themselves. So Stu is the senior statistician at the Donkey Sanctuary, and I thought it would be a useful role and an interesting role to feature, given the vital importance of data to all charities, from fundraising to campaigning, but also just making sure that an organisation is working as efficiently as it possibly can, that it has all the information that it needs to make the decisions that are ultimately going to be of benefit to the people, and in this case, animals that they exist to serve.
Absolutely. And it's a very, very common complaint in the charity sector that charities often don't have the data that they really, really need. So it will be really, really valuable to hear about someone who makes this a big part of their work.
Absolutely. So we'll go straight in.
One of the things that we do is we use a lot of open source data. So one of the main data repositories for donkey numbers globally is the FAO, so it's the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. When I first started here, this was on their website. It wasn't the most user-friendly way of interacting with the data, especially not for our staff. So one of the things that I've done is automated a system to bring the data down from the FAO and present it in a user-friendly format. So anyone in the organisation can, if they want to know, let's say the numbers of donkeys in Ethiopia, can come in, they can click on Ethiopia on the map, and it can show the trend in that population over time. As a team, we've sort of formed to provide dashboards for people and to feed out the information that we've got stored to the end users. And this was the first dashboard that we created. So we wanted a catchy name for it to sort of get the organisation involved in using it and things like that. So that's how Donkeypedia was born.
Could you tell me about your journey into the world of data?
Yes, so I've probably not had the typical journey into the world of data. A lot of people get into data science via either doing computer science and focusing on the data aspects of it, or maybe doing a mathematics or a pure statistics degree and then getting into data science. My background is actually in ecology, but on the side of that, I've also had a passion for computers ever since I was really young. So I was always building computer systems, designing apps and things like that. After university, I did my PhD and was looking for work afterwards. I decided not to do a postdoc and started looking at what jobs were available. and found that the skills that I'd learnt during university, so my statistics and geographical information systems, mapping, and my basic computer skills, along with my scientific knowledge, actually made me quite a good data scientist. So I worked for Devon Wildlife Trust initially in their record centres. And then a post came up at the Donkey Sanctuary, which looked really, really interesting because it combined the elements of research with real-world applications of how we can use data to improve animal welfare. And so I applied for the job, and that's how I ended up here 6 years ago.
Excellent. And so you've always worked in the voluntary not-for-profit sector?
Yes. What I find really interesting about the data in the not-for-profit sector is you've got this really nice real-world application of the data science that you're doing rather than a theoretical or a financial output. You're improving the lives of, in this case, donkeys around the world using data science.
So thinking about data in the voluntary sector, how important is it to how charities run and how charities make their decisions?
It's hugely important. Over the last 20 years, we've had almost a transformation from data absence to now we have too much data. And to try and make sense of all the data that we have to make informed, clever decisions about where we need to work, how we need to spend supporters' money, you need to summarise that data to understand the best use where we can have the biggest impact globally. In most organisations, they have very, very complex data that can also almost seem very, very disconnected. That's where you need specialists to be able to go and find those links to get the most for execs to be able to make those decisions. One of the main issues that you will find with data, whatever organisation that you're in, is if you're using poor data to make those decisions, you're going to make bad decisions. So it's making sure that data that you're using is robust and reliable. And where it isn't, you explain those caveats to executives so they can make those informed decisions.
So right now we're sitting here in an office on the Donkey Sanctuary site in Devon. How much of your time do you spend here and how much donkey contact do you have?
I have very little donkey contact, but the people that I work with have contact with donkeys all the time, trying to improve their welfare.
And who else do you come into contact with on a regular basis as part of your day-to-day work?
I think most data scientists will say that they come into contact with people at all levels of the organisation, and that's the really good thing about working in data is you can be talking to one of the chief executives one day, and then you're talking to a groom the next day, and you know it's working at all levels of business that keeps the variety in the job and actually keeps the job really interesting. So let's say for the grooms, we would be giving them automated updates about the care that needs to happen to the donkeys, or they'll be feeding data back to us, where the executives would be more interested in strategic goals and KPIs and things like that. But it's having that breadth of work that keeps data science as a job very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you must have an unbelievable knowledge of all levels and all areas of the charity, sort of a great bird's eye view.
Yeah, I mean, in the Donkey Sanctuary, it's very interesting. So we've got sort of our data team that deals with the donkey focus data, but we've also got a supporter services team that deals with the supporter focus data as well. And we collaborate quite closely together, which is really interesting. But yes, being a data scientist, you do get a very broad overview and also quite a detailed insight into that data and the workings of an organisation.
And could you tell me what a typical day or perhaps typical week looks like in your job?
Yep, there's definitely no typical day. But one of the main things that we do is feeding out data via automated processes. So the first thing in the morning, what will happen is overnight, whilst everyone's in bed, their data will be collated, organised and distributed to them in whatever way they need that. So it's either spreadsheets or dashboards or automated reports. If there's an issue with that, it will send us an email. So first thing in the morning, when we log in, if we have an email, we may have some problems to fix. Then I will have a number of meetings during the day. Because we work across projects and we like to keep regular updates with people, we normally are involved at the inception of a project. So what data do they want to collect? How do they want to collect it? Where are they collecting it? Those really fundamental, important questions. We also need to understand how they want their data back at the end. So those are sort of pre-project meetings. And then we have catch-up meetings whilst the project is ongoing to make sure everything's going well, the data is nice and robust that's coming in, if there's any changes that are needed. And then we normally have wrap-up meetings at the end of projects as well, just to sort of evaluate how things have been done, what's gone well, what's not gone well, and also to report on that data. So that could be an internal report or it could be a scientific publication.
So what would make a day particularly good or particularly special for you at work?
Well, being a statistician, it would be spending the day modelling. So that would be collating sort of some open source data, finding some new sort of undiscovered golden nuggets of data available that we can supplement with our own internal data. And then spending the day sort of, some really geeky sort of coding. We code mainly in R. We also do a bit of Python. And some other languages as well, but yeah, using R to come up with some really, really nice models that are complex, but give us new insights into our data to improve the lives of donkeys. And
can you think of a time recently where you've come across some really great data and that's made you really excited?
So I mean, it's kind of the using spatial data. So we can take what's called raster data and use that to supplement our information. So about donkey welfare, for example, you can use climatic data to understand where dry areas are, and to link that then with our welfare collected information to suggest where we would expect to see abrasions from harnesses or something like that from a donkey that's working in a country.
Mm. And I mean, it sounds like your role is really varied. Could you tell me about sort of two of the furthest apart aspects of what you do?
So I think every data scientist will really understand this. 90% of the job is cleaning data and understanding that data. So there's that 90% of the job, which can be quite laborious at times and takes the skill of concentration, not being distracted. And then there's the other aspect that I've just mentioned, which is the really cool, nice modelling side of it. So we do a lot of behavioural observations using quantitative behavioural assessments. So that uses things like multivariate statistics to understand the behaviour of our donkeys and how that changes over time. We also have a lot of veterinary data and clinical information, which is all retrospective, so we're not doing new experiments on donkeys. It's using that existing data to understand things like liver disease and potential causes of liver disease. So we use a Cox proportional hazard model for that. And then you've got kind of your nuts and bolts sort of statistics, your summarising of data, how many donkeys are on a farm, which is far more complicated than most people understand. We have a lot of barns, donkeys move around, they sometimes move to the hospital for treatment, they will be moved with their bonded donkey because that's good for their welfare, and then they will move back, so actually keeping track of all that data is very complicated. I often explain it to my 8-year-old daughter is Daddy counts donkeys at work, but there is a huge amount of complexity behind counting those donkeys.
What I think is really interesting about what Stuart is saying here is that combination of both, as he calls it, the donkey data, but also that they have this dedication to looking at supporter data as well. And I think one of the things that I often hear about how this is so valuable is the kind of creating that cohesive story and being able to back it up. So if you know if you have data about what your supporters care about, whether it's welfare, whether it's health, he was saying they get hold of, veterinary data, things like that. If you can use that to build a really compelling and backed up picture of what is going on with the animals themselves, it is going to help you to have so many clear communication messages and lines that you then go to with your supporters. And you can align those two things based on what the supporters value and what, the animal's most urgent needs and requirements are. It is a massive undertaking.
It certainly is, and there are two teams responsible for those respective elements. So Stuart is very much on the operational side of donkey welfare, and then they have another data team who takes care of those supporter insights. But yes, as you say, making sure that those two sides are speaking to each other and that the findings are being used in the most effective way possible. And are there any perks to your job?
Yes, there's loads of perks to my job, but I think the best one is the donkeys. Improving the lives of donkeys and knowing that you get up in the morning and you make a difference by using your skill set is probably the main perk. That's seconded by working with global experts in their subject matter area as well, and having those people that you can call on, and also having such a beautiful site to come and work at as well is fantastic.
And for somebody listening to this who's maybe early career, considering going into a data role in the charity sector, what advice would you have for them?
I would advise that your soft skills are equally as important as your technical skills. Be good at technical things, be good at coding, be good at understanding data when you're shown a new data set for the first time, really get to grips with those sides of it. But actually it's a communication, because what you're generally doing is taking something that is highly complex and trying to distill that down to its bare bones to give non-data science experts the information that they need in small packets to make informed decisions. The other things that are really, really important for someone getting into data science is, as I said earlier, 90% of the job is cleaning and checking your data as well. So yes, sometimes it can be a little bit laborious, but that 10% where you're doing the really cool modelling makes up for that 90%.
And in terms of qualifications, if you were looking to recruit a new member onto your team, what would you be looking for?
So I think with my background being in ecology and now being a statistician, I'm quite open to qualifications. As I said, it's probably those soft skills that I'm really, really interested in, but backed up with technical skills as well. So it wouldn't matter to me whether a degree would be in computer science or mathematics or ecology. I'd be looking for someone that can demonstrate good data science and good communication.
And if they haven't got one of those degrees, how can they demonstrate their capabilities in data science?
So there's actually something called GitHub. So on there you can post code that you write.
GIT?
Yes. And you can post code that you write. So actually, if you're just writing code anyway, what I would recommend is having a GitHub account and posting up really cool, interesting code that you're writing, because what that does is it shows an employer that you might not have a degree, but you've actually got those technical skills anyway. And then at an interview, if you can demonstrate that you've got good communication skills, then yeah, I think that would make a good data scientist for any organisation.
And demonstrating also their passion and self-motivation.
Yes.
And if somebody wanted to develop their data skills, are there courses out there, any providers that you would particularly recommend, resources that they could go to online?
So there's, with using R for doing statistics.
And R is that modelling that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, R is a statistical computing sort of framework, really. It's a computing language that's mainly used for statistics, but actually you can do so many things with it. So we can build dashboards with it, we can make automated reports with it, and we can interact using APIs with other websites as well, pull down information, collate information. There's this challenge every Tuesday, it's called Tidy Tuesday, right? And this is an organisation called Posit, releases a data set, and people can just play with that data and do really cool visualizations. And actually playing with data and playing with coding is probably the best thing for them to do. There's also other websites that do run free courses. They can be quite limited, but it's really just having that experience of exploring data and understanding it and presenting it in really nice visualizations or really easy to digest ways.
Yeah, it's all about the accessibility, isn't it? Like you say, making sense for people who don't have a data mind, but ideally need to understand the information that you're processing and presenting.
Yes, and giving it into a visual way that they can also interrogate the data, because you might provide them with data, but actually giving them the power to play with that data a little bit as well, in a semi-controlled way, gives them the power. They feel like they're empowered by the data to explore it and make decisions for themselves as well.
Well, Stuart, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for telling me about your job, and hopefully we can go and have a little look around the sanctuary.
Yes, definitely. Let's go see some donkeys.
sounds like a trombone, doesn't it? As someone doing a very poor brass band rehearsal.
Yeah, they were really quite muted, these donkeys. I'm not sure if it was the weather. We actually spoke to a couple of vets to understand why they were so mute on that particular morning that I went. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to the bottom of it, but caught just a little bit of a...
They were microphone shy.
I think they might have been.
They?
Yes. So going back to Stuart and his work in the data field, I have to confess that quite a bit of what he said went a little bit over my head, and I'm probably not alone in that, but certainly demonstrates the importance of taking the time to work out what data you need, that it's collected in the appropriate way, and that you've got somebody with the appropriate skill set to then make sense of it and feed it back in an accessible way to inform the decision making at the charity.
Absolutely. I mean, as a sheer coincidence, I'm actually myself currently engaged in quite a big data gathering exercise, and I've been working on this since the end of June. And my goodness, I was so naive when I went into it, because I was told we can automate this process. You know, we've got these amazing AI tools that we can use to sort of just pull it all in from all these different websites. And so I've been given this big data dump, which we used an automated tool to gather. And my goodness, validation is so important. So what Stuart said about the importance of cleaning and understanding the data is absolutely right. You cannot underestimate the importance of it. And that process is so incredibly time consuming. But if you don't do it, then you end up with a data pot that is wrong and that doesn't make sense. And you can't go out and make any kind of statement with it. So actually recognizing the volume of time and resource that it takes to gather this kind of content, it is always more than you think it's going to be. And for me, having done this one incredibly light touch and basic data gathering exercise, I suspect that is where the pain point is for most charities, because it has taken far more energy than I could have possibly foreseen when I started working on the project that I'm currently engaged in.
And as he says, 90% of his job is cleaning and understanding the data. So you'd have to be really, really driven and motivated by that cool 10% that he described to want to have a job in this field.
I can well believe it.
We hope you enjoyed our day in the life of a charity data scientist. We'll be back with another day in the life in a few weeks' time, when I'll be shadowing the head of philanthropy at Leukemia UK. You can find out about previous day in the lives of a grant maker, a policy advisor, and a charity procurement expert by clicking on the podcasts tab on the Third Sector website and searching for Day in the Life.
And that's it for this week. So we will be back next week with guests from Mental Health First Aid England and the recently rebranded Trussell, formerly the Trussell Trust, to talk about mental health in the sector. Our producer is Nav Pal.